This short DVD records the building of St Francis Church, Salisbury, reproducing the black and white film which was made at the time. The watercolour painting of the church was lost for a while, but turned up at an auction in Andover, and it's now back in St Francis. Appropriately, we start with Wyans Morleverer, the priest in charge, introducing the Mayor of Salisbury and inviting him to turn the first sod. The architect, Robert Potter, handed him a spade, and the Mayor, Mr C. Thomas, duly turned the first turf for the new building on Friday, the 28th of May, 1938, watched by members of the congregation. Mr Morleverer was the man with the vision and drive needed to get the project started. The Bishop of Salisbury had entrusted him with the establishment of the new parish, as housing was extending northwards along Castle Road. The new parish was established in 1930, and the congregation initially worshipped in a wooden hut on the Stratford Road. This hut was erected by volunteers, and the early work on the new church was also done by local volunteers. Here they're seen clearing the site with great enthusiasm, of course supported by ladies providing tea. It appears that the young men are all wearing ties and some of them jackets, but there's no sign of hard hats or safety boots anywhere on the site. Mr Morleverer lost no opportunity to raise funds for the building work. He had a small table on the corner of Beatrice Road and Castle Road, where he sat and collected gifts from passers-by. One of the pillars of the church is called the Pillar of the Passers-by, to honour their contributions. By this time, the first builders had been appointed, Godson and Sons. What an appropriate name for church builders. And work officially began on the 1st of November 1938. Sadly, Godson and Son went bust before the church was finished, and the work was completed by Wirt and Way. The amount required for the building was £9,700, of which £6,500 had been raised by this time, according to the banner beside the road. The trees in the background are in Victoria Park. This is the first time that we see the real builders at work. In contrast to the young volunteers who'd probably gone off to the war at this stage, these men wear no ties, but they do wear caps. They were presumably too old or otherwise unsuitable to be fighting in the war. Here they're offloading and stacking bricks from a lorry parked on Beatrice Road. while here they're mixing concrete for the foundations and wheeling it into position. This concrete mixer and a mechanical hoist used to lift barrows of concrete to the roof were the only pieces of mechanical equipment used during the works. Everything else was done by hand. And as you can see, they were able to dig very neat trenches. This is the deepest part of the excavation for the boiler room on the northeast corner of the building. Even here, the excavation is by hand. The man at the bottom throws the chalk that he's dug out onto a platform, and another chap on the platform throws it up to ground level. From there, it will have been taken away in wheelbarrows. By January 1939, enough work had been carried out on the new church for a foundation stone laying ceremony to be held. On the 21st of January 1939, a service was held that started in the temporary church, the hut, and finished at the new church site after a procession up Waters Road and down Castle Road. The procession down Castle Road was headed by the congregation, with representatives of other churches. Behind them, led by a cross-bearer, came scouts, cubs, guides and brownies with their flags. And then the local MP, the mayor and corporation in their robes. Followed by the church choir, with city clergy, the archdeacon, the dean, and the Bishop of Salisbury, Dr. Neville Lovett. Once everyone had made their way to what is now the chapter room, behind the altar, but was then an open area with a large tarpaulin cover, the service continued. After some preliminary words, the stone was lowered into place on a chain operated by the architect. And then the dignitaries and representatives of the congregation took their turn to walk past the stone and give it a gentle tap with a wooden maul. Eventually, the bishop then pronounced the stone well and truly laid, and at the end of the service, He was presented with an inscribed silver trowel by the architect. This trowel is still kept by the church. What a pity we can't actually lip read and see what they're saying. A scroll recording the early history of the church, including the laying of the foundation stone, was laid in the brickwork with the stone. A copy of this now hangs at the back of the church. We're now well into the construction. Some rather splendid cars are parked beside the site along Beatrice Road, with the trees of Victoria Park in the background. Brickwork is advanced on the columns and the curved wall, which is the back of the sanctuary, the east end of the church where the altar stands. The big rectangular block sticking out of this wall is the back of the foundation stone. Note that all the scaffolding is wooden, with the poles lashed together, and metal scaffolding with clip fastenings didn't come until later. Now you get a general view of the south side of the church. A long length of the south wall has been completed. And we move to the west end of the church, which faces Castle Road. And the curved base is for the baptistry at the northwest corner of the building. We move on again, looking westwards. There are the Victoria Park trees again, with work well advanced on the south side. Meanwhile, on the north side, there are still foundations under construction, and they're pouring concrete into the trench. Then we go back to the south side of the church, looking west. The curved walls are around the stairs going up to the Lady Chapel, the area above and behind the altar. Not very much traffic on Castle Road today. And here they're laying the stones that form the bottom of the windows at the west end of the church. This is the north side of the church, with walls and columns well advanced. You can see by now there are actually a lot more houses in Sunny Hill Road in the background. And here we have the west end of the church. And the windows in the north wall. This is a demonstration of how to get bricks from one level to a higher level. No crane, forklift truck or hoist, or even carrying them up a ladder. You just throw them. The upper level they are being stacked on is the roof of the chapter room. Some of this is now the floor of the Lady Chapel inside the church, and some is the roof outside. The brickwork is done with a great deal of care and concentration. Perhaps they knew they were being watched. The design of the sawing horse hasn't changed in 70 years, but nowadays you would use an electric saw instead of doing it by hand. And here's the south wall with work well advanced on the windows. This is considerably later. We're looking at the west end. The west wall has almost reached its full height, and work is going on at the top of the windows in the south wall. That's the wall alongside Beatrice Road. We've seen how you get bricks upper level. Here we can see how the mortar is hoisted up to the bricklayers. It doesn't look very well controlled, but they do seem to have developed a method that suits them. You've probably noticed a hod carrier in the background a few times already. Bricks were carried around in hods. This is a method that's probably been used for centuries. The east end of the church seen from Beatrice Road, with the low-level windows in the vestry and the chapter room standing out clearly. Another later view of the east end, with the upper windows now visible. The tower over the Beatrice Road door is well advanced by this stage. And here we see men working on the tower well above the flat roof of the church. Moving inside, you can see the scaffolding inside the church supporting the construction of the roof. Now, on top of the church, looking down into Beatrice Road, you can see that we've moved from timber scaffolding tied together to rather more modern steel scaffoldings and fittings. And now a view, as the camera moves round, you can see the extent of the development of housing on Sunny Hill Road. Here they're finishing off the east end windows, and again, the work is all being done by hand. More views of the steel scaffolding and fittings, and the man hauling up the mortar. Whereas down at ground level, they're starting to put the glazing into the baptistry windows. sequence shows how the roof was concreted. Concrete was poured from the mixer into barrows, which were then taken to position and hoisted up to the roof level. The sides of the structure were protected by timber boarding. Once on the roof, the barrows were wheeled around on boards laid on the reinforcement, and the concrete was spread out where it was needed. Letting the empty barrows down needed fine judgment on the hoist and on the men below. The semicircular section behind the hoist is the baptistry. Now we have a rather long but sadly silent interview with a man on the roof. We can only presume that he's probably the foreman. The church is now finished, and for the first time the film has some colour. The formal opening service was on the 5th of October 1940. The civic officers process first from the East End, where everyone has been putting on their robes, followed by the clergy and the choir. Eventually, the bishop reaches the west doors and, in accordance with tradition, is refused admission. He hammered 3 times on the door to be let in. The marks are still visible on the door. Once all the officials were in place, the congregation came in from Beatrice Road. And finally, this is how St. Francis Church looks in 2010.